Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Erika Heald, and you are watching Content Chat. Today, my guest is Marcia Trask. She is one of my favorite people on this planet. She's a friend and a former colleague and a former Forrester analyst. So she's a very fancy lady, and she is here today to talk all about how to show the impact of your content marketing, because it's that time of the year where you're defending budgets, where you're defending what you want to do for next year. But you can't do that if you can't show the impact you've already had on business results with your content marketing. So Marcia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Erika, it is my pleasure. You know that.
Well, I love that you are willing to spend some time talking through how to really show content marketing results, because I feel like every organization that I've ever worked in, except the one where I met you, it's been like such the difficult situation when it comes to being able to really understand how content marketing has impacted the pipeline and led to actual sales. Of course, the one place we met, we had a Salesforce MVP on staff who somehow did all the magical connections, and we knew every piece of content that touched every sale, and every person that came in through whatever channels, what content they consumed. It was magical. But we realize, I think, that was a unique time and a unique place. So I think we
In many
definitely,
ways.
definitely. So let's just talk about, since then, like what you've seen are some of the not Nirvana like situations that content marketers find themselves in when they're trying to actually track their marketing efforts.
Well, how much time did you say we have? Um, there is a whole lot of non-content measurement nirvana out there, and there's a lot of different reasons why. I mean, like you mentioned, the situation where we met, we had a very gifted Salesforce administrator. Not everyone has one. If you do, buy them brandy for the holidays and treat them very nicely. But it's not always an ideal situation. But the common patterns that I have seen in terms of struggling to measure the value of your content, you've got technology and data as a fundamental layer. There's people who struggle with, what data should we be tracking? Do we have the right data? Is it dirty? Are we collecting, all the data standardization issues? There's a systems component to that. Are we looking at the right platforms to get the right data that we need? Do we have someone who can assist us, who's got those technical chops? And then frankly, there's also, and I say this in a really nice way because I love content people. I am a content person. We don't always think like business people. We think like artists or writers, which is fantastic. That's what gives us skills at our job. But a lot of times you have to think like a business person. And so as you're, producing content and building your content plan and executing against it, you've got to be thinking, how is this helping the business? What are the goals and objectives I'm working towards? What this specific piece of content I'm developing, who is it aimed at? What stage in the buyer's journey? Is it a different audience than a potential buyer? What do they need to get from it? What is, you start to ask those questions because those are the questions that management is going to be asking you. They want to know things like, I'm investing X amount of money in content. What am I getting from it? What kind of audiences are we reaching? What kind of actions are we compelling people to take with this content? So I think there's always going to be technology and data challenges, but fundamentally, if we can start to look through what we do with a lens of a business person as well as an artist, that's why marketing is an art and a science. That's going to help us defend and grow our investments in content.
It's funny because, of course, content governance has been on my brain a ton because I've just done, I did presentations to both CM World and Marketing Profs B2B forum about content governance. And it's really missing frequently. People aren't discussing those goals at the start of a content engagement because they're not using an intake form.
Right.
They aren't doing, they're not having those meetings where they align on a content strategy and put it in writing and say, here's what we've all agreed to, so that then they can go back and point at it. They haven't said, here's, what metrics we all agreed upon as being what will show that we're successful. So then in the middle of the year, all of a sudden somebody changes what success looks like, or comes up with a random idea such as, well, we need to have at least one piece of content go viral. And, if you don't have that governance in place, you're left scrambling and trying to articulate to somebody that they're being, unrealistic, and that their demands are not something that you can, just conjure up. Although I did receive an email this past week telling me that, somebody could train me, to show me how to have guaranteed viral content. And it was only going to be $99 too. So it was very budget friendly. And I mean, it's so damaging that people are out there saying these things that then end up in the inboxes of our marketing leaders, or worse yet, of our executive leadership team. So then they think that it's reasonable to decide that, okay, we need to have one viral hit from our content team or everyone's fired.
Yeah, there's agreeing on goals up front is so critical, and that is something that I preached for years as an analyst. I'm now a recovering analyst, but I still strongly believe in it. And the goals have to align to the company goals, and you need to have that be clearly documented. It needs to be overly communicated internally, because again, you are going to get somebody. I heard a story years ago that just always stuck with me. A friend of mine worked PR, so professional communications, and they had a big press release one day because the company had done, I don't remember what company, they'd done something just absolutely amazing. So they put out a press release. Well, it was a huge hit. It got picked up by the press that covered that space, and the stock went up $1. Right. The only thing the CEO of the company took away from that was issue a press release, stock goes up $1.
Oh, no.
So he's telling my friend, I need a press release a day because I want the stock to go up $1 a day. And it's like, oh, okay. How do I explain to somebody who has no clue? So that's when you have to do things like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but here's the plan we all signed off on. And the major goal here is X, and then the secondary goal is Y. And issuing a press release a day is only going to divert money from hitting those goals. Are these still the goals that matter? And that's the kind of objective conversation you need to have with people. You still may get that random runaway CEO who's like, oh, press release a day. Okay, then you go to, PR Newswire at the time, and you say, how much is it going to cost me for that? You put the bill in front of him, and then you go, oh, maybe not.
And then he says, oh, well, we'll just do it on social media, because people, they don't understand that you need to have a content strategy, and an actual story for what you're doing when you're posting on social. So you end up with, corporate social media feeds that aren't social. They're just one promotional, no one cares thing after another.
100%.
Because somebody just has the idea, well, we need to make sure people know everything we're doing. Why? Yeah. Who signed up for that? No one wants that.
No one wants that.
It's like your own employees don't want that, let alone strangers who are following you on socials.
If issuing a press release a day made your stock go up $1 a day, don't you think everyone else would be doing it?
And how on earth would we possibly read all of those things?
Or care?
Yeah. Because
starting from a good, objective, documented, here's the goals for the company, here's the goals marketing is signed up to support, here's how content is helping do that. Yeah, maybe there's wiggle room or the situation changes and you have to flex, but 80% of the time, 90% of the time, you look at that plan and go, hey, this is still the plan we agreed to, right? Then that's what we're working towards.
Exactly. And before we kind of move on with the conversation, I will just share, I helped an organization, a nonprofit that I was working with, go through the exercise of having, everybody from all the respective departments, everyone who created any kind of content, anyone who was, having stories that they were sharing with their membership, everyone came together and we did a content strategy for the company, the organization as a whole. And then we did departmental ones that rolled up to it. So that way people had the visibility into what everyone was doing, and that they made sure that everybody's individual content creation, content goals were all laddering up into the same vision, because, people had so much that they were planning that really needed to intersect with each other. And that wouldn't have happened if everyone hadn't gotten together and had a shared planning document, because people were meeting separately. Everyone had a different idea of what the timeline should be for things. And when they got together, they found out, oh, hey, actually, all of this stuff is bunched up in the first quarter. Maybe we need to move some of it, because otherwise we're going to be drowning everybody in promotional content talking about ourselves. So,
which is, boy, this is every time the subject of content comes up, I always remember this. Worked with a very, very brilliant lady when I was at Serious Decisions, and she made the best story about, or had the best little story about content. And she would trot it out every time we talked to clients, or on a phone call, or at a client event or something. And she'd say, please be careful, because I have a teenage daughter, and my teenage daughter spends her days doing this. Because it's all about the selfies, right? Don't have your content be the selfies. No one cares. I mean, I'm her parent. I stopped caring about the selfies. So whenever you run into doubt, just picture a teenage girl on her phone, and that should help steer you straight.
Or picture me being the annoying person editing the content that you're trying to get approved to be shared with the client, writing with them all over it constantly.
Yes. Oh.
That is something I will credit Razor Suleiman with being the one who introduced me to radio station WIIFM. What's in it for me? Like, I can whenever I write it, I hear Razor in my head saying radio station WIIFM. But it's such a good way to remember. You've got to have that what's in it for me when you're sharing content, if your expectation is that somebody else is going to engage with it, share it, talk about it. Because if it's all about you and it's not helpful to them, it's just not going to be useful, and it's not going to have any results. Exactly. Yeah. And if the only results you get are likes on something, so what? That's not
that's the Lord save us from vanity metrics comment right there.
And some channels, we're not going to name and shame certain platforms, but some channels, that's what passes for engagement is, oh, you got likes, but you're not getting click-throughs, which from my perspective, since I primarily work with B2B or membership associations, you want to be getting people taking action of clicking through and engaging with that content. That's the reason that you're sharing the content. So if they're not resharing it, if they're not commenting, if they're not clicking through, that content's not doing its job. Its job isn't just to get a like.
No. Well, and we did a little skit, a little intro to a presentation one time at one of the Serious conferences, and it was on measurement, and we had a couple of people stand up, and one is like, hi, I'm the CFO, and I'm coming to this board meeting, and I'm talking about, the cost of capital we have, and what's the return on all of our overall investments, and, what's the market forecast for next year, and the head of sales gets up and talks about, how much revenue they brought in, and customer retention, and all this like really important, impactful stuff. And then the CFO stands up and goes, hey, we got like 200,000 likes, right? Who's not going to get listened to at that table?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. So it all is coming back to understanding what the point is of your content and how it actually makes a difference. So yeah, don't be that person proud of your vanity metrics. No one cares. It's like the selfies. No one cares.
No one cares.
Now, that said, a lot of folks will feel like that they don't necessarily have the ability to track as much as we used to, because of course, there are lots of limitations, there are lots of privacy changes in place, but there are a lot of channels that do have tools within that platform. So I was wondering if you could share, if we could maybe start with talking about some of the in-platform tools that people can be using. Because that seems like in most cases, we as marketers, as content marketers, we should be able to either already have that access, or we should be able to reasonably request it.
Well, I think that's a really, really good question/discussion point, Erika. So before I get into the nitty gritty and start dropping tool names, let's take a step back for a moment and really think about, we talked about audience a few minutes ago. When you think about measuring your content, it's really important to think about your audience. because your audience is going to be more people than you think it is. So we in modern, and again, my background's almost entirely B2B. In B2B marketing, we are so blinkered by everything's all about demand. Like, unless you can prove, I wrote something and it brought in a lead, or it identified somebody in a buying group, or it helped create an opportunity, it's worthless. And I think what we need to do is deliberately pick up those blinders and set them to one side. Because think about all the audiences we reach with content. So yes, we're going to be communicating to prospects. Yes, we are going to be communicating to existing customers, because as you know, this, I don't know, I guess recession's too strong a word. As this downturn in marketing right now that we are all grimacing our teeth and enduring is going through, retaining customers is critical and important. A lot of people have shifted money into customer marketing activities. So you've got, yes, existing buyers or existing customers, net new buyers. Absolutely. But think about who else our content touches. It touches influencers who may never buy from us, but have a big say in what other people do. It touches our internal sales organizations. If you're an organization that works with third-party channel partners, you're reaching out and speaking to them. You are looking to the media. You are looking at internal audiences a lot of time. As somebody who's been on a content team, I've certainly developed material for sales training or for internal employee training or to help HR with something. You've got your peer comms things, like we're sending out press releases because we have the media as an audience or analyst firms as an audience. So we have so many audiences that we touch, that when we get blinkered into all that matters is what we do for prospects and existing customers, we're cutting out a whole world of explaining our value. And it's not just content people who do this. Everyone in marketing has just fallen in over the last 10, 15 years into this bias. And what I used to tell CMOs was, look, unless you spend 100% of your budget on demand efforts, you should not be measuring 100% of your measurement against that. It just doesn't make sense. You're leaving out part of the ROI equation.
Yeah.
So, okay, getting off my soapbox there, what I think people need to think about is, okay, look, yeah, there's some common platforms where you can pull information about content performance. You can look at your website. You can look at your blog platform. Obviously, those are easy, low-hanging fruit. You've got, Google Analytics and other analytics tools that go out and measure web traffic and all that fun stuff. But if you really want to look at the whole content picture, you have to broaden your lens. So you can be looking at things like, are there metrics in my sales enablement or sales asset management platform where I can track and see, are reps using the material that we've written for them to use at the right stage of the buyer's journey? Are partners consuming the content we're giving them to help with their sales efforts? Are we putting material out for existing customers? Maybe we've got an existing customer newsletter. I'm just making that up. Is it being read? Is it being consumed? Are people commenting on it? Or are we getting people talking about things like that? Even something like a lowly project management system, if you've got Monday.com or Asana or Basecamp, you can get a lot of information there, because there's two sides to the content story you should be measuring. There's content performance, which we all get very, very focused on, as we should, but there's also the process of developing the content. Are we producing it on time, on budget? Are we making the right things? How many review cycles are we chewing up? Ultimately getting down to, what is it actually costing us to produce this? So there's a lot of information in those kind of systems as well that help paint a very comprehensive picture about your content. So again, it's thinking through, who's the audience? Where are they going to get that content? And can we tap into those systems and data to tell that story? I, of course, would be remiss if I neglected, there are existing content platforms. You've got your Contently's or your Compose or things like that, and you'll get some metrics there. But again, it's taking that bigger picture view, because content it's everywhere. And we're really limiting ourselves if we're only talking about, this is what I wrote to an email and the email got this many click-throughs and therefore there's value.
And that reminds me, frequently, frequently people, because they have this idea in their head that social media is free, they will not even put in any of the content distribution, the time and effort it takes to, put together the distribution plan and to then actually do that promotional content writing, do the dissemination of the content. There will just be here's the cost for developing it.
Right.
And they completely miss, unless there's a paid ad component, they completely miss the distribution costs.
Mhm.
Or worse yet, they don't budget anything for
Right.
the content distribution. So then it goes nowhere and it does nothing.
Mhm, mhm. Well, here was a sad stat that I learned when I first joined at Sirius. It blew my mind. Something this was replicated in multiple studies. Roughly 70% of all content, again in a B2B environment, we didn't study B2C, but 70% of content in a B2B environment is basically wasted investment because it's not getting to the right people that it should go to, or it wasn't written with the right audience in mind. That's a big number.
So depressing, because
Yeah.
the last thing you want to do is put all of that time and effort into creating content that
94 review cycles and then have it go nowhere.
I mean, that's so sad.
I know, I know. That's okay. We're here. We're making a difference right now.
100%. Well, I know, one of the big kind of controversies right now is around attribution. And specifically, a lot of people are basically saying that attribution is dead because of how many of the different social platforms don't pass any information. And then, of course, you also have privacy settings that are default for Mac users and Apple users that are not passing your data. They make it very easy to say, don't track me. So, attribution ends up being something where we have to measure it a lot closer to the source using like our first party data, using things that we have more control over. But I feel like people then, because we no longer can rely on some of those third party attribution sources, that we are getting totally hung up on stuff like last click attribution, which makes me so, so angry. Because of course, that last piece of content before somebody hits the, register for a demo button, there were so many pieces of content before it. And, creating more of those pieces that are just like that last little push that gets somebody over the hump isn't going to necessarily do anything for you. So let's talk a little bit about attribution. From your perspective, are there any tools that are actually worthwhile or helpful to get at more of that, especially when you're thinking about owned content?
Oh boy, you have opened Pandora's box here. I'm looking at my teacup, going, "We really should have gotten nogged up for this conversation," because it is the holidays, and if we're going to talk about attribution, it's a little hard to do. All right, let's talk attribution. Big breath. Um, I am going to put it right out there for people. There is some value in attribution models because if you're taking the time and effort to count something, great. I personally think attribution models are the work of the devil. And that's a big statement, but hear me out. Um, Attribution models are an attempt to, by all of us well meaning marketers, they're an attempt for us to take something that is a multi person, long, many cycles, non-linear, somewhat organic buying journey path. And we are forcing it into some kind of a linear mathematical model where we can say, oh, X and Y equals blah, which means I should invest this much in this tactic because it has the biggest return. The other so basically we're putting this artificial constraint on something, and it's not at all representative of the entire buying journey. We all know that. The other problem with attribution models, and I'm going to apologize in advance for all the gentlemen on the phone call today. This is my mental image of attribution models. They're a lot like women's shapewear. You You can rig them to show whatever bell curve or shape you want. You want a nice column or 20 silhouette, we can make that happen with an attribution model. You want, a 50s cone bra, we can do that too. Need a little extra padding, out comes the Wonder Bra, right? You can make your attribution model say whatever you want. And that's the fundamental problem with all of them. If you're biased on first touch, all you're really looking at are things like, well, what's my thought leadership content doing? What's my PR doing? You're neglecting everything else in the buyer's journey. Yeah, do they have some value? Sure. If you're looking at, I'm an early stage company and I'm trying to build up a database, maybe you want to look at some first touch because you're trying to build up your contact list. Other than that, kind of worthless. Last touch, you mentioned right now, everyone's like focused on that last that, okay, here's a story you're going to know real well. Back when you and I were working together, we had a boss who was very into data and modeling. And he discovered doing some analysis that the most common last touch point before somebody went from a prospect to a sales accepted opportunity or sales accepted lead was they went to a webinar. And the company had produced a couple of kick butt webinars recently, like, a major feature, a leader in the HR space came and spoke. We had one where we got the head of the Joie de Vivre hotel chain come in and speak, right? It was catnip to our audience. Like, these were two people our audience cared deeply about. So we had phenomenal webinar registration rates. We had phenomenal attendance rates. Everyone was engaging with that content. People were watching the recording of it forever. Yeah, it opened up the door to a lot of opportunities. Our joint boss at the time looked at the data and said, oh, well, webinars equal more opportunities. We're going to hire somebody and we're going to produce a minimum of one webinar a month, sometimes two, because they're magic and they create opportunities. Well, what happened? The quality went down because we couldn't get high-level speakers like that. We didn't have the budget for it. And so, it went from, here's a respected, CEO of a hotel chain that built this phenomenal culture to here's a bored, newly hired product marketer going on about some Norky feature. And suddenly webinars weren't delivering anymore because we were focused on the wrong data from an imperfect attribution model. We also confused channel with content. And that's another thing I see happen with attribution models. That's a problem. So in terms of attribution models that I've seen work, I've seen one work decently. And that was, I got a chance to meet with the head of data analytics at Salesforce when I was in the analyst role. And they had built a very sophisticated, very good multi-touch attribution model that was weighted with common sense. It was not perfect because there is no such thing as a perfect attribution model, but it was good and it was solid and it used common sense things like, hey, if somebody's engaging at an executive dinner, like they RSVP'd and they showed up and they stayed and had a conversation, wow, we're going to rank that a lot higher than somebody opening a damn email.
Yep.
And again, it still wasn't perfect. And they reviewed it like every 6 months to make sure, are we still okay with these, wiggles and ratings on the different tactics? And so it kept a lot of the that's meaningless or that was ours, sales going, oh no, I knew that buyer, marketing didn't bring it, all that stupid finger pointing. It kept it to a minimum. It didn't eliminate it. But that was a very well crafted attribution model. But generally, I look at attribution models and everyone's pointing at me like, oh, it's beautiful and shiny. And I'm like, you're catching a little slice of something really complicated. And you could get data out of it that causes you to make erroneous decisions. So I treat them with, respect and some distance. One analysis method, and I know you want me to name a tool, and I'm going to disappoint you. I'm not going to name a tool.
That's okay, though. I mean, I think that's just as valuable because people are being asked, well, figure it out. How are you going to do it? And they're like, I don't know.
I don't know. There is a method that was developed when I was at Service Decisions. I did not develop it. There were way smarter people than me who were working on that. But it's called touch analysis. And this is a really genius analytical way to take a look at what's working and what's not working in your buyer journey. And the concept of it is pretty simple. We all know every, sales journey starts somewhere in time and it ends. And there's lots of steps in between and everyone is slightly unique. So we don't know what all those steps are. Fabulous. We can still work with that. There are a couple of hard data points we do know. We know when a new deal is closed or if somebody renews, like that is a hard date. We also know, depending on how well we maintain our systems and our work with the sales team, we know when something becomes, hey, it's an officially recognized lead or opportunity or whatever our terminology is, and we're going to start working at it. So those are two fixed points in a pretty long, messy path. What we do with touch analysis is you fix those 2 points. And then you look at your data and you say, I want a representative sample of what I consider a good deal. And that's subjective, and that's meant to be subjective. Maybe it's a deal that closed really fast. Maybe it's a deal that bought the exact set of products or the offering mix that you're recommending for people. Maybe it's one of those big whales that came through. It's just like a monster deal. Like, oh my God, this like is life changing. You know, we suddenly signed the U.S. Army or something. You know, it's a huge opportunity for us. You get to define what a good deal is. You go back through your data, your Salesforce or whatever your CRM is and your other systems, and you say, okay, here's my list of 10, 20. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. Here's my list of good deals. And I've got these fixed points. When did it become an opportunity? When did it close? Now I'm going to go back and just for those accounts, I'm going to look at what content, what offers were consumed leading up to becoming an opportunity, then from an opportunity to this closed one. It's incredibly eye-opening because you start to look at, are there patterns? Did a key member of a buying group engage early in the cycle? What kind of content were they engaging with? Maybe once it became an opportunity, they started consuming video demos of the product like crazy. Like this is something to replicate. The information you can get out of this kind of analysis is the kind of stuff that if you see patterns, you can then take it to people and say, let's replicate. Video demos are scorching hot. We kind of bumped them down the priority list. We need to bump them up because that's what people are consuming on the way to becoming an opportunity. The other thing that's really good about touch analysis is a lot of attribution, and again, flawed model, is it only looks at the channel. The channel is just a channel. It's airwave, it's digital space, it's a blog page, it's whatever. It doesn't consider the content and what impact that content offer was. Now, it's serious. We had a definition that a tactic is 2 parts. It's a channel, a delivery mechanism, and it's the offer. And when we get obsessed with the attribution analysis, we're just looking at the channel. So if we do touch analysis, we can say, yeah, here's the number of emails that were consumed or the number of webinars that they went to or the number of events they went to. But we can also filter it and look at what were those offers they responded to. That's powerful information. Now, again, I said I'm not going to give you a name of a tool. But as far as I know, there's nobody who's cracked the code on doing this as a tool. But if you take this concept to come to either in-house data teams or I've worked with external data teams, and they've run this analysis, you get some really powerful insights out of it. It's not cheap. It's manual. You'll get some data from your systems, but you got to piece it together. But it's powerful. And it does give you information that is something you can scale. So that's my little commercial, is to think about that and not swear blind allegiance to attribution models.
And what's nice too is once you've spent the time of, doing that analysis of that ideal, type of process, then you can ask AI to go in and look at all of your data and find things that are trending in that right direction. So you know that you can spend some time there. Um,
Exactly.
because, you can't skip the step of that human being with the understanding of what the content actually was, because it's highly unlikely that you're using a system that's actually letting you put in all of that stuff and that you're doing a good job of having a consistent
Right.
taxonomy
Tagging all that.
tagging. I mean, I
Don't
wish.
even get me
I
started on
wish.
taxonomy.
But, we just got a good question from Gary Magliolino about.
Gary! I know Gary. Hi, Gary.
I had a feeling you might. Um, so how important is lead scoring in attribution and sales pipeline velocity? And this is another, it's like, I think he took the opening of, well, they're talking about attribution, so they are fine with talking about the big, thorny, ugly debates that are going on.
Gary, I know Gary is brilliant, and he spends his days wrestling with these questions. So my Gary, if I had a hat, I'd be off to you. So lead scoring, that opens up. So that's when we definitely need to switch from tea to like martinis. That that opens up a whole other can of fish. Lead scoring, again, it's been valuable. Um, it's kind of running the end of its life. Again, I know that's a little bit of a controversial statement, but as we've learned, especially in B2B, we came at it with this idea that there's a single human and they have a budget and they have to go buy something, and then they're going to interact with vendors and they're going to leave little breadcrumbs of activity, or, to quote the old Eloqua stuff, the digital body language, and we could track that and measure that and then hand them over to sales and they get nurtured and they buy. The reality of today is, if you look at all the different companies have all these different funnels, and we put stuff in at the top and we want to see what falls out the bottom, and there's all these various stages, and we touch things at the various stages. There was some really depressing data that Forrester unearthed when I was still with them, which is basically less than 1% of everything at the top of whatever your funnel is actually makes it down to the bottom. Think about that number for a moment. All the hundreds of thousands of dollars that are getting spent to create leads, to put them in the top of this mythical funnel, to fall to the bottom as sales, less than 1% of them actually do. Okay, so leads have kind of run their life. There's a concept out there now, which is about buying groups, which is, hey, instead of going, I want to find that one mythical person who touches, 20 things in my offering mix and get them to sales, I'm now going to look at, hey, are there a bunch of people from within an account that I care about that are touching things? That's a bigger signal than trying to throw out one, just track one person. Part of the problem with the myopic focus on leads is that everyone looks, for these magic leads. And if you see other activity in the company, you throw it out because you're like, oh, I've already got a lead for that company. And it's like, no, this is a sign that a buying group is potentially forming. You've got other people researching this. They could be different titles. They could be, the nucleus of this buying group. So, again, lead scoring, it's fine. It was something we were counting. I think it's much more powerful again now to shift to things like, hey, are we seeing an uptick in activity within an account that could potentially be a good fit for us? Let's look at nurture all of that. Like, who are they and what are they doing? And do we have an understanding for the kind of buyer we're going after? What does a buying group typically look like? Like, do we need a certain C-level person involved, which rarely happens? Do we have the right somebody who'd be a champion for the deal? Do we have people who could be influencing the deal in this? Do we have somebody who's going to be, the final decision maker? Do we have, people who are ratifiers? Is somebody from purchasing looking at the website? This is all really valuable information. And again, we miss it when we are just focused on a single lead or sets of leads and scoring those leads. So Gary, happy to dig into that later with you. Preferably over a glass of wine, but lead scoring, again, it can be useful. It was a metric we all lived and died by for a lot of years, but I honestly think its time is fading. And again, it's another piece of data that can skew that artificial attribution model, maybe in not helpful ways.
And, I think another related issue is frequently people are still sending emails that when someone replies to that email, no one reads the response. Or somebody reads it and they don't like what was said and they don't take action. And the example I'll give is I do all sorts of research as part of presentations that I'm giving, or while working with clients on a retainer basis. And so sometimes they don't have an ungated version of something that's in the designed version. So I'll have to go in and fill out a lead form on their site. And the first time I get an email from their sales team, or worse yet, a phone call, I will tell them very politely, hey, I actually, I'm just using this, to benefit work I'm doing for you guys. I'm not a lead. I cannot tell you how few times anybody is taking me seriously when I've said that. Even for industries, for that I should not, there's no reason anybody would ever think that I would be, a real buyer. But somebody needs, somebody has a quota somewhere that they're trying to meet of either how many leads they're working or how many touches they've done or what have you. So I can't get rid of some of these folks. And do you know what eventually happens when I can't get rid of somebody that I keep saying I am not a lead, especially if they've laid off people I know in their marketing team and they are still pitching me things? I eventually report them as spam.
Yeah.
Because they are spam.
They are.
I said, I'm not a lead. Please don't, send me those emails. And they keep doing it. Then they are spamming me. And that's a good use, an appropriate use of the report as spam button.
Well, and okay, so you'll love this one. Sorry, my necklace is strangling me. I was at a Salesforce event one year, Dreamforce, and it was the end of the day, and I was at a restaurant with some colleagues, and we were finally getting a little dinner, and I desperately needed to use the ladies' room. And so they're like, "Oh, it's upstairs." So I went upstairs, and there was a private party being held in the room upstairs, right by the entrance to the rooms. And there was this sweet, I don't know, 12-year-old kid, looked like, in my opinion, standing there with a badge scanner, blocking the access to the bathrooms. Like, "Oh, I'm sorry, if you're up here for the party, I got to scan your badge." I'm like, "I'm not here for the party. I'm going to go pee on your shoes here in a minute if you don't let me into the bathroom." And finally, I'm like, "Okay, you know what? Bless you. You really took your orders well. Scan my badge. Right? I got to go." So that, of course, start getting emails from this company. And I politely wrote them and said, "Hey, look, I am not a prospect. I'm an industry analyst. I was attending this event. I was barricaded from going to the ladies' room. Kudos to your volunteer. Really, I am not a lead. Please don't put me on your list. I don't even cover your space as an analyst." And I got a very polite note back saying, "Yep, we'll take care of it." And I was like, "Great, God, kudos to you." What happens? Another week later, I get an email to, "Dear Marcia Trask, parentheses, industry analyst, do not contact, parentheses," and then the spam email. So I hear you.
Oh, it's so terrible.
Terrible. It's terrible.
It's like somebody tried to do the right thing, but they didn't even have the internal mechanisms to allow them to do the
To
right
do the
thing.
right thing. Yeah. So again, it keeps coming back to, who's your audience? And is this really a valid contact? And, kind of to the point Gary made a minute ago, you're spending money to capture these leads that aren't leads. I did some work with a software company that manages like millions of real estate properties globally. And if you like breathed on their webpage, you were a lead. Like they had such a low standard for leads. And they were collecting literally millions of leads. Somebody in one of their rental properties goes to the website to say, "Hey, I'm having a problem with whatever." It was a lead. And then they would send these monthly millions of leads to a telequalification team out in Manila, and over 50% were thrown out. All that money being wasted, like all this to generate leads that are going nowhere because there weren't the right systems in place. So again, leads, I think, have had their day.
Well, one thing we didn't talk about in our attribution conversation was UTMs. And I have to say, people kind of, when you say UTM, they sort of feel the same way as when you say QR code. They just kind of go, ick, it sounds difficult, it sounds unsexy, we don't want it. But when you're trying to figure out, how things are performing, and you're trying to understand how your campaigns are doing, or what topics people care about, what channels people actually respond from, that sometimes can be the only way that you can get some of that data. Especially if people are sharing on dark social, they might just forward that email to someone else who will click on the email using that UTM that will show, what you sent them that email from. Or they might just copy and paste a link from the page, or send the page. Like when you're in various Apple products, you can just hit the little send, and it will send the URL that you're on, which will have those UTMs. So that way it'll retain some of that information, versus just having it be the black hole of direct, which really just means we don't know. It does not mean that somebody typed in the long URL to go to that piece of content on your website, because that doesn't happen.
Right. So UTMs. So first of all, the name of a UTM cracks me the heck up. What is it? Urchin tracking module or something like that. It makes me think of, again, we're coming up on the holidays. Charles Dickens, we have these little urchins running around. It's very cute.
Please, can I have some attribution?
Please, have some more. But they're a tool, and frankly, they're a useful tool. And if you've got a decent marketing operations team, they're all over those like white on rice. I mean, they love them because they're, they want to measure, they want to know. They're naturally curious, and they're usually like super into, let me try technology. They're not that hard to apply. And you're right, with them, you get to see what are some of your top performing programs at a program level, and also individual pieces of content. It allows you things like, hey, I'm suddenly spotting some influencers I didn't know about who were doing things like sharing or reposting. And it helps you tell the story of more of your cross-channel marketing efforts. So I'm pro. I think they're a lot cooler than, QR codes, although I have seen some cute QR codes lately where like designers are getting into it and it's like a picture, so it's not just, oh, it's a stupid little QR box. So yeah, they're certainly useful. They're not a magic bullet. There are no magic bullets, but they definitely add another layer of insight, especially if you're trying to connect like your web traffic and your social media. They fill a really important niche there. So go urchins.
I feel the exact same way, with one exception, which is you got to make sure, though, that you have that strong documented taxonomy in place, because when you do not, that's when you have, a source of ebook, e-dash book, e capital B book, and all of those things end up being seen as different in your Google Analytics, for example.
Yeah.
And so then you end up having to do manual deduping. And that's something that, in doing content audits and doing reporting, Alec and I have spent many, many days cursing the person who had not taken the time to put together a taxonomy as we're trying to figure out which of these were, in fact, the same thing or
Lady,
not.
you are so preaching to the choir here. And it's not just a content taxonomy. My plug is that marketing organizations need a general vocabulary list. And frankly, my last content role, one of the first things I did was I sat down as I was onboarding and trying to figure out like, okay, what's all the internal language in terms? And I wrote a terminology list. And I'm like, okay, when we say this is what we all mean, right? I'm going to post this. This is how I'm going to be using it in content going forward. And if you have a change to this, let's discuss it. Don't just go off and make something up. I remember being at Adobe Systems and sitting in a big meeting, and we were trying to talk about something to put on one of the web pages, very high traffic web page.
Mhm.
And we spent the first 20 minutes, I'm not joking, of this meeting with people from like multiple departments, global marketing, like everyone, trying to argue what the hell we call this like 3 by 4 inch piece of digital real estate.
Is
Oh,
it
it's a
above the
digital
fold? Is it the
marketing.
hero space?
Oh no, it's the headline. Oh no, this. I'm like, oh my God, I'm just calculating the salary being wasted this week. Can we agree on the name and move on?
Yeah.
Yeah, so 100% taxonomy, so critical.
What do you think are some of the other big pitfalls other than like not having that common language in place that ends up derailing the efforts to actually prove content marketing's value?
Well, there's a lot of things. So again, there's this kind of fixation on the vanity metrics. There's, the lack of a coherent taxonomy. There's the, topic we started the conversation with, which is, line of sight to goals. It's one thing to say, hey, I wrote this thing and it's really cool, right? And it got lots of clicks. Okay, but it's a lot stronger to say, yeah, this is a data sheet that I wrote that was agreed upon because establishing service offering A in this industry is critical to company future growth. And, this piece of content helps with that. It's an entirely different conversation. So that line of sight to the goals and the objectives and what you were specifically doing towards that, that's another. Another is the blinkers around everything has to be demand. Um, you know, and I think we have to break free of that self-imposed bondage to say, hey, this is a piece of thought leadership content I developed. It's really important because it's helping establish the company brand, or it's bringing us visibility into a net new audience, or, we're moving upstream or downstream and we need this kind of information. And no, it's not tied immediately to revenue, but it's laying the groundwork for revenue. So just being free to say that, and again, breaking that everything's all about demand mindset. I think all of those are things we struggle with. We struggle again with data. We struggle with systems and the fact that, it's all piecemeal and we have to, be little squirrels running around getting the right data for this. Again, partnering with your operations team is critical. And the other thing sometimes we just run into is sort of lack of resources, lack of time. We're not on the priority list. At my last company, I had a phenomenal relationship with marketing ops, and I really wanted to get some stronger content measurement in place. I was working actively on it. My team was working actively on it. And I had a lot of like willingness with our operations team, but they kept pivoting and changing company direction. Like, oh, we now have to go launch X, or we're going to do this. Sorry, guys, we're going to kick you down the, putting in this dashboard another 3 months because we just priorities change. And sometimes you got to be patient, and it's never going to be perfect. And sometimes you settle for what you can get. And we had one person again at my last company who just did the reporting, and I would sit with her and say, okay, I know this is the data you're seeing. What can I tease out of here that is a content story that I can tell? Is it going to be perfect? No. Am I going to be flexible and run with what I've got? Absolutely.
Well, it's interesting too, because I think in so many organizations, the content team or in the marketing team for that matter, don't necessarily own the channels that they're using.
Mm-hmm.
And so you end up also in this situation where these other organizational owners of a channel, such as whoever owns your website, they don't want to ruin their own metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had a client that had a web page, just one web page that was like 20% of all of the website traffic. The problem is the reason it was 20% of all of the website's traffic is it was the top performing search result for like this famous quote by, a famous person. The content had nothing to do with their current line of business.
Nope.
The person was not someone that was part of their company or in any way, shape, or form actually relevant to their audience. No one did anything else on the site ever after looking at this page, ever. There
We
was no
can't mess up that
conversion.
metric.
But they were unable to get the web team to agree to archive that page, even though it skewed all of their data and all of their results, and every kind of, tool that they would be using would make all the rest of the content look like it was performing poorly. They still wouldn't take it down because they didn't want to have that momentary hit to their analytics. They couldn't see a dip in the analytics from taking down that page, even though that page it had zero value to the company.
Yeah, that's a problem.
So what would you have done if you were the content leader that I advised? I advised that person to find a new job. And because that's me. All right. That's honestly what I said to them. I said, if you're really having to have this conversation and someone is so keen on, on this vanity metric of here's how many visits to the website, even though they understand and agree that that content is completely irrelevant, that person is not your partner. That person is not going to help you do things to actually, present your content better, to reach the right people. That person is not your friend. That person, is living in La La Land. So I just, do you see a way that if you're stuck in that kind of situation where you love your team, you love what you're doing, but you have this person like that, how would you convince them? Or what would you do?
Well, so this is the famous saying that you learn really quickly when you work in a place like Serious Decisions or Forrester. It depends. I would, if it was me, I would start off by having a hard conversation with whoever heads marketing operations, because that's screwing with their data too. And they tend to not like that very much. And they're usually a pretty powerful advocate and ally. So that would be step one. If that didn't start to address the situation, I would go to the CMO/CRO and be like, look, we live and die by these metrics. You guys are asking for these metrics. We know we've got some problems where we're deliberately getting false data. We've got a team that's refusing to, clean this up so that we can get a coherent story. Would love for you in your, position to have a conversation or do something about that, because again, they have to stand up and defend a lot of those metrics in board meetings and, base budgets and all those fun things off of it. If the response was, oh, we don't want to rock the boat. Yeah. Okay. At that point, I'd either be looking at brushing up my resume, or you could be sneaky. I've done this a few times, and talk to some recruiters and say, gosh, there's this really great web person I know, and they're open to opportunities. Because sometimes you can stay, but maybe you can help the other person move on.
I've done that too. I have done that too. Yes. Not
And
gonna
hey, if
lie.
they choose to leave, it's their choice.
It's their choice. You just, you just helped them carry their bags.
That's right. With enthusiasm.
So, we just have a few minutes left. So do you have any kind of like other parting words of, of wisdom or, just general tip so that way folks make the most of this? We basically get once a year. We have the opportunity to show off what we've done. How do we make the most of it?
How do we make the most of it? Well, there's a couple things. So again, um, the closer you are to understanding your audience and that buying journey, and the closer you get to that, you can start to tell a really powerful story. Again, the last organization I was at where I was running content, I came in, did an audit, and was really powerful data. Like when I joined, like, hey, you know what? I put together a content framework. Because when I first started, everyone was doing we have awareness and we have consideration and we have conversion. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But the problem with that is there's no B2B buyer in the history of B2B that's ever said, wow, I'm really deep in the awareness stage. No one has said that ever. So I reframed our content framework to say, look, I don't give two hot potatoes about awareness, consideration, conversion, or whatever your flavor of that is. I care about it from the buyer point of view. And from the buyer point of view, it's, hey, I have a problem or I see an opportunity. I'm deciding if I'm going to do something about that. And I'm going to build this whole content structure around a narrative based around the buyer. So instead of awareness, consideration, conversion, we had discover. What was the second one? I'm having a brain fart. Discover, evaluate, and commit to purchase. And that allowed me to build a whole narrative. Like, hey, if I'm in discover phase, I'm figuring out I have a problem or maybe there's an opportunity. Then I got to decide, is it worth doing something about it? Like, is the pain I'm feeling or the opportunity big enough to make that move? And that's where a lot of deals, frankly, die. Like, hey, it's a problem, but I'm not going to do anything about it right now. Once I do decide to do something about it, who out there has solutions that meet my need or fill this gap?
Yep.
Great. Let me start comparing them. Like, there's this or there's that, or there's this or there's that. What other people have been doing these? What have they done? And then when I'm further down, like, hey, I think I'm ready to pull the trigger. Is this the right company? Are they viable? Can I have a long-term relationship with them? Are they going to deliver the value they said they're going to deliver? And then ultimately, am I going to be renewing or become a loyal person? Like, this is a long process. And we get so focused on these little, like, again, 1, 2 touch. It's a lead. It's sales's problem. So I would say, really define what you're doing, get close to that audience and that buying group, collect that data, do an audit if you haven't already done it, because you can start to tell some powerful stories. So I didn't have great measurement, but I could go in and say, hey, look, based on my initial audit when I started 6 months ago, we had a ton of data in the discover and we had so much in evaluate. But it was only about how great we are and our great features and we're so awesome. Again, it was all the selfies. There was no, hey, if you're looking at us, you're probably also looking at this kind of a thing. Here's the comparison. So in 6-8 months, I was able to say, look, here was our whole buying journey. Here's where we had screaming chasms of no content. Here's where they've been filled. So we now have a coherent end-to-end story. And I can start to say, yeah, we've gotten some extra hits, like blog posts on these topics have skyrocketed. There's a need for this. We need to do more. I'm partnering with operations to really dig into what's going to respond. I'm spending time with the various channel owners to say, hey, in your experience, because you know this channel really well, what have we done here that's resonated or not? I would sit down with sales and be like, hey, we know you get a ton of stuff from marketing. You throw most of it away. What really works for you and why? Like, let me understand that. So even if I didn't have sexy, attribution models, or, I hadn't been able to do a touch analysis yet, and I didn't have a lot, I didn't have a content dashboard, I could still go back to company leadership and say, hey, in this amount of time, this is what has been produced at this average cost with a team of one full-time hire and a couple of contractors. And here's the gaps we filled in the buyer's journey. Here's where we've had things trend. Here's where we've heard requests for more of this content. Here's then my budget ask for the next year to keep building this out. And it's not based on people like us, it was based on getting close to that buying audience and trying to fill in those needs. And that told a very powerful story without having a lot of formal measurement in place.
I love it because it's basically, in the end, it just making sure that you understand all of this and are approaching it from the audience's perspective and not from the company's perspective. Because content's job is to be outrageously useful and
Yes.
helpful. So I think this conversation we've had today should help anybody who is in there fighting for budget or, you know, fighting to get their content strategy approved. I think we've given them a lot of really great fuel.
I
So
certainly hope so, because it's important, and all of you who are still out there and still writing and still producing and fighting off, the approaching Chat GPT mess. I hope this is helpful because you guys are doing great work and keep doing it.
And Marcia, if folks want to hear more from you, where's the best place to connect with you?
Oh, feel free to pop in on my LinkedIn. I am sadly still in the job search mode, so I'm a lady of leisure and happy to chat with anyone.
What is your ideal role or company? Use your last minute here and share what would be your dream job.
Oh, well, content is awesome. I love it. I would happily go back to writing and working out over, editing and copy and all that great stuff. I love product marketing as well because I've done a fair amount of that as an analyst. That's basically what you are. And I spent a lot of years in operations, and I'm a mean chief is not mean as in mean, but I'm a really good chief of staff for marketing teams too. So there you go. I'm putting it
All
out there
right.
first.
Fantastic elevator pitch. So if you want to, so here's the real deal. If you have the budget and you would like to make sure that your content is really performing for next year, hire Marcia and you'll be very, very happy. I know I would if I was running a marketing organization. So Marcia, thank you so much
Oh,
for
Erica,
being our
thank
guest
you so much.
today.
This has been absolutely delightful. So glad to catch up and just a pleasure to be here with your content chat audience.
Appreciate it. And everyone will be back next week for our final content chat of the year with Michelle Garrett talking about how PR and content can be BFFs. Take care, everybody. See you next time.